December 1848. A white planter in tinted glasses boards a train out of Georgia, his quiet servant trailing behind. Nobody suspects the truth. The planter can't sign his name because he can't read, and he can't speak much because his voice gives him away. If anyone figures out this isn't a wealthy gentleman and his property, but a married couple running for their lives, they're both as good as dead. There is a moment in every escape where the plan collides with the unpredictable, and what happens next cannot be rehearsed. I keep circling back to William and Ellen's gamble. Not just the train ride, but the decision to turn the very rules that trapped them into tools for freedom. How do you prepare for a world where every glance is a test and every word could unravel you? If questions like these keep you up at night, subscribe and stay with us. Your support allows us to dig deep into stories where survival is just the beginning and history is shaped by those who refuse to disappear. William Craft was born in Macon, Georgia in 1824. The child of two enslaved parents, he learned early how fragile any sense of family could be. By the time he was a young boy, his family had been torn apart, sold off to cover an enslaver's gambling debts. He watched his world disappear in a single afternoon, the outlines of his parents and siblings swallowed by the dust of a slave market. William became property, but he also became a pair of hands in a cabinet maker's shop, apprenticed to a trade that would eventually shape the way he saw himself. The skill was rare, and every finished piece brought pride, but the money his work earned always went into someone else's pocket. As he sanded wood smooth, he listened for news, rumors, or anything that might help him understand a world where the rules could shift without warning. Ellen Craft's life began not far away, in Clinton, Georgia, in 1826. Her mother, Maria, was a biracial woman enslaved by Major James Smith, a white planter who was, in fact, Ellen's biological father. Ellen's skin was so light that strangers often mistook her for one of Smith's legitimate white children, a confusion that made her a living reminder of the blurred lines and brutal truths inside every slaveholding family. That same confusion was dangerous. Tension simmered in the household, each look carrying the weight of secrets no one dared say out loud. At 11, Ellen was given away as a wedding gift to Smith's daughter. The transfer separated her from her mother and forced her into a new home where she was expected to serve unseen and unheard among people who were both her family and her owners. Both William and Ellen grew up learning to read danger in the smallest gestures. For William, a glance from a white customer could mean a day's reprieve or a sudden beating. For Ellen, passing as a white child when it suited her enslaver, then being snapped back to her reality as property, taught her how to move quietly through rooms charged with suspicion. Neither could control where they slept, who they saw, or even what happened to their own bodies, but they watched, they listened. William noticed how white planters carried themselves, how they signed their names with a flourish, how they ordered men like him about. Ellen picked up the shifts in tone between the drawing room and the kitchen, learning to keep her eyes low, her voice soft, her opinions hidden so deeply they sometimes felt like someone else's. When William and Ellen met, it was not in a moment of romance, but in the careful, coded exchanges that passed between enslaved people from different households. They married in 1846. But even that decision belonged more to circumstance than to hope. Their owners allowed it, but did not let them live together. Every visit was brief, every goodbye a roll of the dice. They decided not to have children, unwilling to risk bringing a child into a world where any day could end with a family split forever. The longing for a future that belonged to them, one not measured in someone else's ledger, became the quiet engine driving them forward. Ellen became known for her composure and skill. Whether she worked as a seamstress or handled errands for her mistress, she learned the value of blending in, making herself useful but invisible. William, in his cabinet shop, learned how to fix what was broken, how to improvise when tools were missing or wood was warped. These were survival skills, but neither of them knew just how valuable this training would become. And yet, beneath the surface, both carried a growing sense of suffocation. Every story they heard about someone sold south, every rumor of a failed escape, pressed down on them with new weight. The system expected their silence, but silence was not the same as consent. It was Ellen's appearance that finally gave shape to their most dangerous idea. Her light skin, once a source of household tension and whispered gossip, became a tool they could use. William saw at first the possibility flickering into view as he watched white men trust other white men's signatures without question. Ellen, who had never been allowed to read or write, realized that her greatest vulnerability, illiteracy, could be transformed into a shield if she played the part of an injured gentleman who could not sign a register. Every rule that had been used against them became a thread in a plan so audacious it almost didn't seem real. Still, the risk was enormous. The punishment for running was public and final, for months. William and Ellen turned the idea over in their minds, testing every scenario, calculating every possible disaster. What if someone recognized Ellen as the enslaved daughter of her father? What if a train conductor asked too many questions? Every day spent in preparation was a day spent performing the roles slavery demanded, but with a new secret humming beneath the surface. Only one thing was certain. If even one detail slipped, if even one assumption failed to hold, both of them would vanish into a fate worse than anything they had already survived. That was the world William and Ellen Craft inhabited before the disguise, before the train tickets, before the world mistook them for anything but what they truly were. What pushed them from quiet desperation to open rebellion? We will come back to the moment that forced their hand. Every plan starts as a whisper, but the world outside does not wait for whispers to become shouts. The Crafts' idea was impossible, yet impossibility was what they lived with every day. It was not a single event that forced their hand, but a slow, suffocating pressure, a tightening of the air in every shared glance, every story of families ripped apart and never seen again. The rumors grew sharper as winter approached. The owner of a nearby plantation had died, and his estate was being broken up, the people he held scattered with the livestock and furniture. William and Ellen knew that if their owners needed cash, they could be sold south without warning, separated forever. That threat, faceless but constant, carved out the last bit of comfort. The time for waiting was gone. The only question was how to gamble everything they were on one last, staggering risk. William had spent years watching the world of white men with a craftsman's eye, noting every detail. He saw how authority was performed, how a suit could hide ignorance, how a signature could open any door. Ellen, whose face had always been a dangerous puzzle for those around her, finally understood how the very thing that set her apart could be used against the rules that kept her trapped. Their plan took shape at the kitchen table late at night, when the house was quiet and the only witnesses were shadows. If Ellen could become a white male planter, just in appearance, just for a few days, then William could be her servant, just as everyone saw him already. But the disguise would need to be flawless. Not only race and gender, but class, education, and illness all had to be woven together. Any flaw would be fatal. They began to assemble the pieces. Ellen would need men's clothing, the kind worn by the wealthiest planters, tailored to her slight frame. She would need to move differently, to walk with the heavy, practiced confidence of someone who expected deference. There was the question of her voice, too soft, too high, too revealing. Illness then, a sore throat, an injured jaw, a quiet manner explained away by pain. But the greatest risk was something no costume could hide. Ellen could not read or write. Every hotel, every train ticket, every checkpoint along the journey demanded a signature, a name on a page. If she hesitated, if she faltered, suspicion would follow. The solution came from the smallest detail, a sling. If her right arm was bound and bandaged, no one would expect her to sign anything. If she looked pale and fragile, with green glasses and a poultice on her cheek, strangers would keep their distance. Illness would do what fear could not. William's role was even trickier. He had to disappear into the background, yet remain close enough to watch every move. He would become the silent servant, eyes down, quick with a coat or a bag, invisible in the way only someone used to being unseen could manage. Every gesture, every word had to fit the script that white society expected. They rehearsed over and over, practicing the exchange of tickets, the handling of money, the careful distance between master and servant. Each rehearsal was a reminder of what they stood to lose. The plan was nearly ready, but the world around them was changing too quickly to allow for perfection. News arrived that their owner was in financial trouble, that debts might be called in any day. There would be no more time to refine the performance. The crafts gathered what they needed: a suit, a silk top hat, gloves, the sling, the green glasses, and a bundle of poultices. Ellen's hair was cropped and hidden under the hat. Her posture straightened, her face set in a mask of practiced authority. William carried their meager savings and the hope that no one would look too closely. The first real test came sooner than expected. Train tickets had to be purchased by Ellen in full view of the station clerk. She stepped forward, her voice low and strained, and requested 2 tickets to Savannah, one for herself, the ailing master, and one for her servant. The clerk looked up, hesitated, but saw only what he expected to see: a sickly young planter and his property. Money changed hands, tickets were issued. They walked to the platform, hearts pounding, every step a miracle and a threat. Waiting for the train, Ellen felt every gaze on her skin, every whisper threatening to pierce the disguise. William could not comfort her, he could not even look at her directly. If anyone sensed their connection, the danger would multiply. A white man nearby commented on her poor health, offered advice on remedies, and eyed William with the bland condescension of someone who saw nothing amiss. Ellen nodded, kept her answers brief, and clutched the sling with more conviction than she felt. The train whistle blew. They boarded, taking their assigned places, master in the whites-only car, servant behind. The journey had begun, but the real test had only just revealed itself. The craft's plan was not a single leap, but a tightrope stretched across 4 days and hundreds of miles. Each station, each hotel, each stranger along the way was another chance for disaster. What neither of them could know yet was how close that disaster would come, or how the smallest slip, a slip of the tongue, a glance held too long, could have ended it all. The disguise was only the first mask. The real danger waited in the spaces between, where truth threatened to spill out. How long could they hold on to the performance before the world caught up? The answer, as they soon learned, was measured in heartbeats. The next encounter would push them to the edge, where even the cleverest disguise might not be enough. The train lurched out of Savannah, and with it, the craft's performance entered its highest stakes. The first real test came in Charleston. At the Planters Hotel, Ellen, now Mr. Johnson, was asked to sign the register. The hotel clerk's gaze lingered, suspicious but unsure. Ellen lifted her bandaged arm and offered a faint, apologetic smile. William stood behind, silent, holding his breath. The clerk hesitated, then said, "No matter, sir, your servant can handle the luggage." He glanced at the sling and moved on. Relief hit in a wave, but it was not victory. It was only the beginning. That night, every sound in the hallway became a threat. William watched the door, listening for the creak of boots that would mean discovery. We will come back to why the hotel register would haunt them later. The journey north was not a sprint. Each transfer brought new eyes, new dangers. In Richmond, a conductor blocked their way at the station, demanding to see papers for William. "You there? Are you his property?" The man barked, expecting only deference. Ellen, voice low and strained, replied, "He is my servant." The conductor was not convinced. He called over a police officer who eyed Ellen's green glasses, the pale skin, the expensive suit. William's heart pounded, but Ellen never wavered. She produced a doctor's note, painstakingly forged by a sympathetic friend before their departure, explaining her recent illness and the need for a servant's help. The officer read the note, glanced between them, and finally waved them on. For the rest of that leg, William sat rigid, counting the stops. Each whistle could have meant arrest. By the time they reached Baltimore, exhaustion pressed down like a weight. On Christmas Eve, the station was crowded with travelers there. Fate twisted the knife. A man boarded the train and took the seat across from Ellen. William recognized him instantly, a regular customer from Macon's cabinet shop. The man's eyes narrowed. "You look familiar, sir," he said, his curiosity edged with menace. Ellen coughed, hiding her face in her handkerchief. William kept his head bowed, praying the man would not recognize him instead. The conversation turned to the weather, to politics, to the state of Georgia. Ellen nodded, answering in the briefest possible way, always careful to keep her words clipped and masculine. The man peered closer, but the green glasses and bandages did their work. When he finally left at the next stop, William's hands were shaking. They had walked a wire over the abyss and survived. But survival brought a new problem. The closer they got to freedom, the more costly any mistake would become. Philadelphia appeared on Christmas morning, but the city was not a sanctuary. The Crafts arrived with nothing but their story and each other. William Still, the Underground Railroad conductor, met them at the station. He hustled them through the icy streets, warning that Southern agents sometimes waited for runaways at the depot. Still asked, "Are you the ones from Macon?" Ellen nodded, tears streaming down her face. Still led them to a safe house, but even there, the shadows pressed in. They could not rest. Word of their escape spread quickly, and admiration mixed with danger. A price was already on their heads. Boston offered a brief breath of safety, but it did not last. In 1850, the Fugitive Slave Act made every free state a hunting ground. One autumn morning, William was working in his shop when Lewis Hayden burst in, face pale. "Slave catchers are here, their names are Hughes and Knight. You cannot stay." Ellen hid in Hayden's attic while William armed himself with a pistol and knife. The Boston Vigilance Committee rallied. Black and white abolitionists posted lookouts on street corners. Theodore Parker wrote legal briefs while others patrolled the neighborhood, warning, "If you take one step toward them, we'll set this house on fire." The tension was so thick that even the air felt dangerous. For days, the Crafts lived as fugitives, always half a step ahead. One night, Hughes and Knight tried to force their way into Hayden's home. They were met by a wall of people, neighbors, activists, men with clubs, and women with boiling water. The agents retreated, but the threat lingered. The city buzzed with rumors. The Crafts could not leave the house. Food was brought in secret. Every knock at the door brought fresh terror. The law was not on their side. After weeks of siege, the committee made a decision. William and Ellen must vanish entirely. Disguised and smuggled by night, they were spirited to Portland, then Halifax, then Liverpool. The Atlantic crossing was a gauntlet of uncertainty. Ellen, seasick and exhausted, clung to William as the ship rolled in winter storms. The English coastline appeared gray and distant, a promise nearly too fragile to believe. In Liverpool, no one asked for papers. No one cared about their skin or their story. For the first time, they could breathe, or so it seemed. Their struggle did not end in England. Freedom was real, but it came with new demands. The Crafts had to reinvent themselves, not as fugitives, but as witnesses. British abolitionists invited them to speak, first to small gatherings, then to packed halls. Ellen, who had spent her life in silence, now stood before strangers and recounted the journey. William read their story aloud, his hands steady at the lectern. They were paid in applause, in admiration, in the quiet respect of those who realized that these two had stolen something more valuable than gold. They had stolen themselves, but the fear never vanished entirely. Letters from home brought news of friends sold away and old enemies searching for traces. Each day they waited for the past to find them again. Years passed, and the world changed. The Civil War ended. The Crafts weighed a new risk returning to Georgia, the place where everything had begun. They purchased Woodville Plantation, the earth itself holding the memory of all they had endured. The land was hostile, the neighbors colder than the English rain. The clan watched every move, and more than once, crops burned in the night. But the Crafts did not flinch. They opened a school teaching freed children to read the words Ellen once could not sign. Their old disguises were gone. Their struggle shifted from survival to legacy. The journey that began with a single train ticket now echoed in every lesson, every harvest, every child who learned to write a name that no one could take away. But what happened to the dream they built on Georgia's soil, and what did it truly mean to return home when home itself had changed? That answer would only come at the very end, when the past and present finally met. Imagine hiding your own name in plain sight, with even a broken arm becoming part of the disguise. If seeing Ellen transform illiteracy into a weapon against her captors surprised you, subscribe now so you never miss another story that twists the impossible into reality. Freedom did not arrive all at once, not even in Philadelphia. The craft stepped off the train into the biting December air, exhausted and dazed, carrying nothing but the clothes on their backs and the memory of every face that could have ended them. Ellen's disguise came off in shreds and pieces, the green glasses tucked away, the sling unwound from her arm. For the first time in days, she stood as herself, not a sickly planter, not someone's property, but simply Ellen. William Still, a conductor of the Underground Railroad, met them with a question that was half challenge, half blessing. "Are you the ones from Macon?" Ellen nodded, unable to speak. In that moment, the world tipped. They were no longer fugitives, they were survivors. But survival was not safety. Philadelphia was cold and indifferent. News of their escape traveled faster than the trains that brought them north. There were whispers, then headlines, then the price on their heads. Slave catchers would be watching even here. The crafts found shelter for a single night, then another, each address passed by word of mouth among abolitionists who understood that freedom in America was a moving target. William and Ellen learned to listen for the silence before a knock, the hush that meant danger, the coded knock that meant help. They never slept more than a few hours at a time. Ellen kept her bag packed, just in case. Boston, for a brief moment, felt like a promise. The city's abolitionist heart beat loud and public. Lewis Hayden's boarding house took them in, and there, for the first time, Ellen and William sat at a dinner table as honored guests. No disguises, no scripts, only their names and their story, yet the air still trembled with risk. The Fugitive Slave Act was law, and every new face could be a threat. Then came the news. Willis Hughes and John Knight, men from Georgia, slave catchers by trade, had arrived in Boston with orders to bring the crafts back in chains. The city's black residents and white allies closed ranks. Theodore Parker, a preacher with a pistol in his desk, wrote legal briefs during the day and guarded the craft's hiding place at night. Every corner bristled with lookouts. The Boston Vigilance Committee made it clear. If Hughes and Knight wanted William and Ellen, they would have to fight the whole city to get them. The tension built, day after day. Ellen hid in Hayden's attic. Sunlight filtered through cracks in the boards, her breath shallow in the dark. William armed himself and waited, the tools of a craftsman traded for a pistol and a knife. Outside, abolitionists organized, posting guards on every street and warning, "If you set foot in this house, you will not leave it standing." Slave catchers paced the sidewalks, watched by dozens of eyes. The standoff hardened into legend. At any moment, the wrong move could turn the city into a battlefield. The crafts waited for the word that would mean flight. And then on a night thick with dread, escape became the only option. Disguised once again, not as master and servant, but as invisible ghosts, William and Ellen slipped out of Boston, carried by allies through the back doors of sympathetic homes. They traveled north through Portland and Halifax, then boarded a ship bound for Liverpool. The ocean was a new kind of terror. Ellen, seasick and weak, clung to the rail, eyes fixed on the horizon. For days the storm battered the ship, and every crash of the waves sounded like pursuit. But no one followed. When the English coast finally appeared, gray and unfamiliar, the craft stepped onto shore and realized that, for the first time, no law claimed their bodies. No one asked their names. No one cared about their skin. They could breathe. Yet freedom was not the end of their performance. In England, the crafts were welcomed as heroes, their story already circulating among abolitionists. But the stage had changed. Now, instead of pretending to be what they were not, they were asked to become something new, living symbols of resistance, teachers in a world hungry for stories of courage and survival. William and Ellen traveled the country, first to small gatherings in church basements, then to crowded halls where hundreds waited to hear them speak. Ellen, who had spent much of her life in silence, now stood before audiences and described the journey in her own voice. The words came slowly at first, then gathered force, steady and clear. People listened, not just for the details of their escape, but for the truth that lived in her pauses, in the way she described hiding her face behind green glasses or feigning pain to avoid a stranger's gaze. The crafts became more than fugitives. They were now witnesses. Every speech was a reclamation, each sentence a small act of defiance against the world that once forced them to whisper. Their London home became a safe harbor for other freedom seekers. Black activists, British radicals, and American abolitionists crowded their parlor, trading news, planning campaigns, and building a network that stretched across oceans. William and Ellen sent money home, helped organize anti-slavery societies, and watched as their story was published and republished, the book Running 1,000 Miles for Freedom passing through countless hands. Still, the past was not easily left behind. Letters arrived from Georgia, some filled with news of friends lost, others with veiled threats. The Crafts learned to live with the unease that freedom had not erased. But England was generous in other ways. Over nearly 2 decades, Ellen and William raised 5 children, all born on English soil, each one a living answer to the question they had asked themselves in Georgia. Would it ever be safe to be a family? Their children learned to read, to write, to dream in ways that once seemed impossible. William attended Ockham School in Surrey, learning the skills of agriculture, preparing for a life neither of them could have imagined back in Macon. When the Civil War ended and Reconstruction began, the Crafts faced a new decision. America had changed, at least on paper. Black men voted, some even held office. The old world was gone, and a new one struggled to be born. William and Ellen packed their family and crossed the Atlantic once more, returning to the South not as fugitives, but as landowners. They purchased Woodville Plantation in Georgia, 1,000 acres of soil that had once been stained with their fear. This time they walked the fields as free people. The work was harder than they ever expected. The land was hostile, the neighbors suspicious. The clan rode at night and fires sometimes lit up the horizon, but the Crafts pressed on. They built the Woodville Cooperative Farm School, a place where children, many of them newly freed, learned to read and write. Ellen, who had once hidden her inability to sign her name behind a bandaged arm, now taught others to claim their words. William, the cabinet maker, became a farmer and a teacher, passing on the skills that had given him purpose in bondage. The school grew, filling with laughter and voices raised in lessons. Each day brought a new challenge, but also a new victory. Children wrote their names for the first time, the letters forming chains broken forever. There were nights when the old fears crept back in. Threats arrived, sometimes whispered, sometimes shouted from the darkness. Yet the Crafts had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear dictate the future. They stood their ground, just as they had on the streets of Boston, just as they had in every station and hotel along their escape. The farm became more than a home. It was proof, living and growing, that the world could be remade from the inside out. The high point came when the schoolhouse doors opened wide and children filed in, faces shining, books in hand. Ellen watched them settle at their desks, her heart pounding with something that felt like joy and awe. William stood at the front of the room, chalk in hand, and began the lesson. There was no audience of strangers, no need for disguise, only the simple, radical work of teaching freedom, one word at a time. For a moment, the past and the present stood side by side. The Crafts, once master and servant by necessity, now partners by choice, watched as the next generation took up the tools they had risked everything to provide. The journey that began with a train ticket and a borrowed name ended here in a Georgia schoolhouse, sunlight spilling onto wooden floors, hope bright as the morning. What William and Ellen Craft pulled off was not just a matter of cleverness or luck. It was a masterclass in using the tools of oppression as instruments of liberation. Their story cracks open the illusion that power always sits with those who write the rules. By flipping every expectation, race, gender, class, they revealed that the boundaries meant to confine them could be slipped like a costume. Social hierarchies, so rigid to those who benefit from them, are built on the theater of belief. The Crafts understood this with a clarity born from survival. When Ellen bound her arm and hid behind green glasses, she was not just dodging suspicion, she was exposing just how shallow the performance of authority can be. The world believed what it wanted to see, and for 4 days, their survival depended on that blindness. It is a lesson that the most dangerous assumptions are often the ones nobody thinks to question. But the real legacy is not the escape itself. It is what the crafts did with their freedom. They could have vanished into anonymity, content with safety. Instead, they turned their entire journey into a blueprint for others, abolitionists, freedom seekers, and anyone facing systems built to erase them. They became living proof that partnership is not just about love or loyalty, but about strategy. Two people, each reading the world for danger, each trusting the other to hold steady when the stakes are highest. Their legacy echoes in every classroom where a child learns to write a name, in every moment when someone dares to challenge the script handed to them. You do not have to accept the roles society assigns you. The craft story shows that even the smallest detail, a bandage, a glance, a withheld signature, can become a wedge in the machinery of oppression. What begins as a desperate gamble can end as a generational gift. The meaning of their journey is not just in having survived, but in having transformed the very ground they once walked in chains into a place where others could start free. That is the true heist, not just stealing away from danger, but rewriting the definition of what is possible for everyone who comes after. December 1848. A train cuts through the dark, the air thick with suspicion, and in the dim glow of the carriage window, a planter in tinted glasses turns his face away from the crowd. Night after night, two figures ride forward, their names hidden, their true selves stitched into the silence between each passing mile. No one dares to imagine that freedom, that impossible word, sits disguised just a few seats away. William and Ellen did more than escape. They built a new world on the ruins of the old one. Their courage remade the meaning of home, of partnership, of freedom itself. What risk could you take if you trusted that the skills forced on you might actually become your greatest strength? Let me know in the comments and keep seeking out stories like these.